People like you don't invest. People like you beg.
Grady Holt stood at the counter in stained canvas coveralls, a folded equipment quote in one hand and his daughter's spelling homework in the other. He said nothing. He didn't reach for the denial letter Brennan Voss had already slid back across the counter toward him. He didn't know the man in coveralls had signed away 4 patents that now ran quietly inside every kiosk of Meridian's own mobile banking app. He didn't know the small syndicate bankrolling Meridian's entire expansion round was a blind trust with his own name buried 3 layers deep in the filings. He didn't know that in 11 days, the fate of this exact branch and Brennan's job inside it would come down to a single signature only Grady could give. Grady folded the denial letter in half, tucked it into his jacket pocket, and wiped one short line into his phone before walking his daughter out the door. By the end of this week, Brennan Voss was going to learn exactly who he'd humiliated in front of a full lobby. And it happens faster than you think. Comment denied below if you've ever been judged by what you were wearing. Hit subscribe so you don't miss how this ends, and let's get into it. Ashcombe Falls was the kind of town that showed up on maps in smaller print every year. The mill on the river had closed 11 years back. The diner on 3rd Street had changed hands 4 times, and half the storefronts on Main wore paper in their windows instead of signs. 2 winters earlier, the town buried Marisol Holt after a short, hard illness that took her fast enough that nobody in Ashcombe Falls got the chance to say a proper goodbye. Grady had buried the version of himself that used to wear suits right alongside her, and he hadn't gone looking for that version since. He hadn't always worn coveralls. 6 years before that morning at the bank, Grady had co-founded a small lending technology company called Ledgerline, working out of a rented garage with 2 laptops, a whiteboard that never got erased, and a coffee maker that never fully worked. The company built underwriting software that lets small community banks approve honest loans faster without taking on the kind of risk that sank them. It worked better than anyone expected. A larger financial firm, Van Trust Financial, made an offer to buy Ledgerline outright, and Grady's half of that sale landed at $50 million in an account he had never once touched for himself. He kept one clause in the sale contract that his old lawyer called sentimental and pointless. For 2 years after the sale, no bank running Ledgerline's core patents, rebranded inside Van Trust as the Swiftland underwriting engine, could push through a major branch expansion funded by Van Trust's investment arm without a sign-off from Grady himself. Nobody at Van Trust expected him to ever use it. He'd asked for the clause the week after Marisol's funeral, in a lawyer's office he barely remembered walking into, because it was the only piece of the deal that felt like it mattered anymore. Grady quietly folded himself back into anonymity after that. He moved home to Ashcombe Falls, back to the house he'd grown up in, and went to work at his late father's hardware and repair shop, the only place in town that still fixed a broken lawnmower for the price of a favor and a cup of coffee. He raised Nora alone from there. He packed her lunch in the same dented lunchbox every morning, walked her the 4 blocks to Ashcombe Elementary, and spent his days elbow-deep in engine grease at Holt & Son Hardware and Repair, a shop that hadn't turned a real profit since before his father passed.
The shop needed $15,000 to survive the year. New equipment for small engine repair, a proper sign to replace the one that had lost its H in a windstorm, enough inventory to stop turning customers toward the big box store 40 minutes out, enough to keep the doors open and finally hire 2 laid-off veterans from the shuttered mill down the road. Grady had the $50 million sitting untouched in a trust he'd promised himself he wouldn't spend on comfort. He wanted this loan to come the honest way, through the town's own bank, so the shop's survival would belong to Ashcombe Falls and not to money he no longer thought of as his to spend on himself. Most mornings before school, an old customer named Walt Petrosky wandered in just to talk, buying a single box of wood screws he didn't need and leaving with a free tune-up on his ancient push mower. Grady never charged him for the labor because Walt had been friends with his father and because the shop's real ledger had never just been about money. "You ought to charge me double for putting up with my talking," Walt said that particular morning, watching Grady load the truck for the bank appointment. "You look like a man walking into his own execution, son." "Just asking the bank for a fair shake, Walt," Grady said, tightening a strap on the equipment quote folder. "Wish me luck." "Luck's got nothing to do with it," Walt said, tapping the counter twice like it settled the matter. "Any bank with sense would be lucky to have your name on their books." "We're not asking anyone for charity, Nora," he told his daughter the morning of the appointment, tying his boots by the door. "We're asking for a fair shot. There's a difference, and don't ever let anyone make you forget it." Nora nodded like she understood, though she was more interested in her spelling list than the loan paperwork tucked under her father's arm. She was 8 years old, sharp as a tack, and had inherited her mother's habit of asking questions until she got a real answer instead of a comfortable one. "Are we going to get the money, Dad?" she asked, pulling her backpack over one shoulder. "We're going to ask nice and see what happens," Grady said. "That's all anybody can do." She asked if she could bring her homework to the bank so she wouldn't fall behind on her spelling test. Grady said yes, the way he always said yes to things that kept her steady, and the two of them walked out to the truck together under a sky the color of wet concrete. The truck itself was older than Nora, its paint faded to a dull red, its bench seat patched in one corner with duct tape that had gone shiny with age. Grady could have replaced it 100 times over without noticing the dent in his savings, but he liked driving something that still needed a careful hand on the ignition, something that reminded him a little of the shop itself. "This truck smells like the shop," Nora said, buckling herself in, wrinkling her nose in the exaggerated way only an 8-year-old could manage. "Good," Grady said, pulling out of the driveway. "Means it smells like home."
Meridian Community Bank sat on the corner of Ashcombe Falls' half-empty Main Street, its glass doors newly replaced, its lobby smelling faintly of fresh paint and the particular optimism of a renovation nobody in town had fully believed would happen. A banner near the entrance promised 12 new jobs coming soon, the corners already starting to curl in the humidity. Grady walked in wearing the same coveralls he'd worn to open the shop that morning because there hadn't been time to change and because he'd never seen the point of pretending to be someone else for a loan officer. He held the door for an older woman with a cane, nodded to the security guard by name, and took a number like everyone else waiting. Nora settled into a chair by the window, spread out her spelling list on a side table, and started copying words in careful, looping cursive. Grady watched her for a moment, then turned back toward the counter when his number was called. Brennan Voss met him there with a practiced, camera-ready smile that dropped the instant he clocked the grease under Grady's fingernails and the frayed cuff of his work jacket. Brennan had transferred in from a bigger branch 18 months earlier, and he made sure everyone in Ashcombe Falls knew he considered the posting temporary, a stepping stone he was too good for. He flipped through Grady's paperwork with 2 fingers like it might leave a stain on his cuff. He didn't sit down. He didn't offer Grady a seat either, though there was an open chair right beside him. $15,000 for a repair shop with a debt-to-income ratio like this? Brennan said, loud enough for the 2 customers behind Grady to hear clearly. "I've seen better numbers from a lemonade stand." A young man 2 spots back in line snorted, then quickly looked away when Grady didn't react. "The shop's been open 30 years, Grady said, keeping his voice even. "It's never missed a tax filing, never defaulted on anything. I'm not asking for a miracle. I'm asking for a bridge loan against real equipment I can show you line by line."
Brennan laughed, short and sharp, and slid the folder back across the counter without opening it any further than the first page. He tapped the folder twice with one finger, like he was closing a door. People like you don't invest. People like you beg, and begging isn't collateral. A woman in line behind Grady sucked in a breath sharp enough to be heard over the lobby's soft elevator music. Nora, seated at the side table doing her spelling homework, looked up at the sound of her father's name being said in that tone, her pencil going still against the page. The branch's assistant manager, a heavy-set man named Curtis who'd been half listening from a nearby desk, started to rise from his chair as if he might step in and smooth things over. He caught Brennan's sideways glance, thought better of it, and sat back down, suddenly very interested in a stack of paperwork that didn't need his attention. Grady didn't raise his voice, he didn't lean over the counter, didn't ask for a manager, didn't so much as tighten his jaw in a way anyone could point to later. He simply folded the denial letter Brennan printed and stamped in under 90 seconds, tucked it into his jacket pocket, and thanked the man for his time in a tone so calm it visibly unsettled him. "Have a good day, Mr. Voss," Grady said. A younger teller 2 windows down, a woman named Josie who'd grown up 2 streets over from a Holt place, opened her mouth like she wanted to say something in Grady's defense. She caught Brennan's sideways glance and closed it again, dropping her eyes to her own line instead, her ears going red.
Brennan smirked, already reaching for the next customer's number. "Try a payday place down the highway. They're used to your kind of paperwork." Nora tugged her father's sleeve on the walkout, her voice small enough that only Grady could hear it. "Why was he so mean to you, Dad?" "Some people mistake a work jacket for the whole story," Grady said, holding the glass door open for her. "We're going to be just fine, Nora Bird. I promise you that." Outside on the sidewalk, Grady didn't slam the truck door or vent into the empty parking lot the way some part of him, the old part, might have wanted to. He watched Nora climb into the passenger seat and buckle in, then pulled out his phone before starting the engine. He opened a single encrypted message thread he hadn't touched in months, the one reserved for exactly one contact, and typed 6 words with steady thumbs. "Pull the Meridian sign-off. Effective immediately." He hit send, pocketed the phone, and drove his daughter to school like it was any other Tuesday, humming along to whatever was playing low on the radio. "You didn't even get mad," Nora said from the passenger seat, watching him carefully the way she sometimes watched storm clouds building over the ridge. "Mom used to say you get real quiet right before you fix something." "Your mom knew me pretty well," Grady said, and left it at that, because some conversations needed to wait until a man actually had something to show for them.
What Brennan Voss didn't know, what almost no one in Ashcombe Falls knew, was that Meridian Community Bank's entire modernization plan was standing on a foundation Grady had personally built with his own hands long before he ever picked up a wrench for a living. 2 years earlier, when Van Trust Financial acquired Meridian's small parent holding company in a deal that barely made the regional business pages, Van Trust had rolled out the Swift Lend underwriting engine to every branch in the network, promising faster approvals and a wave of new small business lending across 3 counties. The technology worked exactly as advertised because it was Grady's technology underneath, rebuilt and relabeled, but never rewritten from its core logic. Van Trust's investment arm had spent the last year preparing to fund a 9-branch expansion, including a full renovation and staffing increase for the Ashcombe Falls location, new hires, a modernized lobby, and a community small business fund that Meridian's own marketing team had already started teasing on local radio ads. The expansion depended on one detail almost nobody at the branch level understood or had ever bothered to read past the fine print. Under the original sale agreement, any expansion project using the Swift Lend engine needed a sign-off from the technology's original architect for 24 months after the sale closed. That architect had a name buried under a shell entity called Highwater Holdings, a name that meant nothing to Brennan Voss and everything to Van Trust's legal department. His name was Grady Holt. He hadn't built Ledgerline chasing a fortune. His old co-founder, a soft-spoken engineer named Teo Marchetti, had reminded him of that the last time the two of them spoke, back when Grady first floated the idea of walking away from the company entirely. "You built this because your dad's shop almost lost its business line to a bank that wouldn't return his calls for 3 weeks," Teo had said over a bad phone connection, static crackling on his end. "You wanted honest underwriting for guys exactly like him. Don't let the money make you forget the reason." Grady hadn't forgotten. He'd simply gone looking for a quieter way to keep the promise, one wrench and one small loan application at a time, in a town too small for anyone at Van Trust to think twice about.
Grady's trust attorney, a sharp, unflappable woman named Priya Akofer, called him back within the hour of his message, her voice tight with the particular urgency of someone who just fielded 3 panicked calls from a much bigger law firm. "You're sure about this, Grady? Pulling the sign off doesn't just slow Meridian's expansion down, it stops it cold. Every branch on the list, not just Ashcombe Falls." "I'm sure," Grady said, wiping his hands on a shop rag as Nora did her homework at the workbench behind him, humming the same tune she'd hummed in the truck. "I'm not punishing a whole town for one man's mouth, Priya. I'm making sure the next town that gets a loan officer like him doesn't get ignored the way I almost let this one slide." "And the Ashcombe branch specifically? You want it singled out or folded into the freeze with the rest?" Grady looked over at his daughter, focused on her spelling words, unaware that the phone call happening 10 feet away would eventually reshape the whole town's main street. "Give me until Friday. I want to see if the branch manager handles this the right way once she understands what's actually on the line." Priya didn't ask what the right way meant because she'd worked for Grady long enough to know he wasn't interested in revenge theater, only in whether people, given a real and specific chance to do right, actually took it. She'd seen him extend that test to contractors, to old business partners, even once to a competitor who'd tried to poach half his engineering team. "I'll draft the freeze notice tonight. Van Trust Legal is going to call you directly within 48 hours, you understand. Highwater Holdings won't stay a mystery to them for long." "Let 'em call," Grady said. "I've got nothing to hide from people who already signed the contract that made this possible." Van Trust's legal team spent Tuesday night combing through the original acquisition file, trying to understand how a 2-year-old sign-off clause had suddenly, quietly been pulled for the entire 9-branch expansion she'd spent 18 months building support for. Van Trust's lawyers gave her a name she didn't recognize at first, Highwater Holdings. It took her research assistant less than an hour to trace Highwater Holdings back through 2 layers of filings to a residential address on 3rd Street in Ashcombe Falls, a town Colette had visited exactly twice, both times for ribbon cuttings that never actually happened. Colette drove to her own branch that afternoon and asked Brennan Voss a single question that made his stomach drop before she even asked it. Who denied a small business loan application from a Grady Holt on Tuesday? Brennan didn't recognize the name at first, not until Colette pulled the branch's loan log herself, scrolled to Tuesday's entries, and turned the monitor so he could read the denial notes typed in his own careless shorthand. That's the mechanic," Brennan said, his voice climbing half an octave. "Runs the old hardware shop on 3rd. Coveralls, rough hands, no real collateral to speak of on paper. I turned him down in under 2 minutes, ma'am. It genuinely wasn't even close." Colette's face didn't move, though her knuckles went pale where she gripped the edge of the desk. "Van Trust's legal department just told me our entire 9-branch expansion is frozen because Highwater Holdings pulled its sign-off on the Swiftland license this morning. Highwater Holdings is controlled entirely by a man named Grady Holt." The silence in the back office lasted long enough for Brennan to hear the lobby's overhead speakers playing soft elevator music through the wall, the same music that had been playing when he'd told Grady to try a payday lender.
"That's not possible," Brennan said, laughing once, badly. "He works with his hands. He drives a truck that's older than half our tellers." "He also built the software running on every single terminal in this building," Colette said, "and as of Tuesday afternoon, he decided he didn't much like how this branch treats people who happen to work with their hands." Word moved fast in a town the size of Ashcombe Falls, though not the way Brennan feared at first. It didn't spread as gossip about Grady's money, because almost nobody outside the bank's inner circle knew that part yet. It spread as a rumor that Meridian's big renovation, the one promised on local radio, the one supposed to bring 12 new jobs to a town that badly needed them, quietly stalled, and nobody at the bank would say why. At the diner on 3rd Street, the regulars had their own half-formed theories by Thursday lunch. Mrs. Alvarez, who'd run the counter there for 30 years and remembered Grady as a boy sweeping his father's shop floor, refilled coffee cups while the talk went around the room. "Heard the bank renovation's dead in the water," one regular said, stirring his coffee. "My cousin over there says corporate's furious about some contract mix-up." "All I know," Mrs. Alvarez said, sliding a plate of eggs across the counter, "is Grady Holt came in here Tuesday afternoon looking calmer than I've seen him since Marisol passed. A man that calm is either at peace or about to make somebody very uncomfortable." Nobody at that counter had the first idea which one it was yet, and Mrs. Alvarez wasn't in any hurry to guess out loud. Grady kept working through all of it. He didn't call a press conference, didn't post anything online, didn't drive back to the branch to gloat or demand an apology in person.
He spent Thursday fixing a neighbor's snowblower for free, restocking the shop's shelves, and picking Nora up early so the two of them could get ice cream before her Stilling test the next morning. "You seem happy today," Nora said, licking her cone thoughtfully on the shop's back step, even though the bankman was mean. "I'm working on something," Grady said. "Sometimes the best thing you can do after somebody's unkind to you is just keep being exactly who you already were." Brennan didn't sleep well Thursday night. His wife, Dana, found him at the kitchen table well past midnight, scrolling through old news articles about Ledgerline's sale, the blue light of his laptop the only thing lighting the room. "You said he looked like nothing," Dana said, standing in the doorway in her robe. "You said it like it was a compliment to yourself." "I didn't know," Brennan said, not looking up. "How was I supposed to know a man in a work jacket built half the software in that building?" "Maybe you weren't supposed to know," Dana said quietly. "Maybe you were just supposed to be decent to him either way." Brennan didn't have an answer for that, and the two of them sat in the silence of the kitchen for a long time before either of them said anything else. Colette Ferris, to her credit, didn't wait around for Grady to come to her, and she didn't spend the week trying to smooth things over quietly and hope he'd forget. She found the shop's address in the loan file, drove over Thursday evening after closing, and knocked on the door of Holt & Son Hardware and Repair while Grady was locking up the register. "Mr. Holt, I owe you an apology I can't fully make right with words alone," she said, standing in the doorway with her hands folded in front of her, rain starting to fleck the shoulders of her coat. "I'd like a real conversation about what happened Tuesday and about what Meridian owes this shop and this town going forward." Grady wiped his hands on his rag and studied her for a long moment before answering, weighing whether this was damage control or something more honest. "I'm not interested in an apology that only shows up because a contract clause made your legal department nervous, Mrs. Ferris." "Then let me try to earn a different kind," Colette said. "There's a town meeting Saturday morning about the branch renovation, already scheduled before any of this happened. Half of Ashcombe Falls is going to be there asking why it stalled. Come, let people hear the truth from you, not from whatever rumor gets there first." Grady looked back through the shop window at Nora, who was quietly restocking a shelf of wingnuts by size, humming to herself, entirely unaware of the conversation happening at the front door. He thought about the promise he'd made her outside the bank on Tuesday, that they were fine, that this would work out the honest way, that begging and asking were two different things. "Saturday," he said finally, "I'll be there, and I'll be bringing my daughter, so I'd appreciate it if whatever happens in that room stays fit for an 8-year-old to hear." Colette nodded once, sharply, like a woman relieved to have something concrete to hold on to. "You have my word on that much, at least."
The Ashcombe Falls Community Hall filled up faster than anyone expected for a Saturday morning meeting about bank renovations. Folding chairs dragged in from the church basement next door when the regular supply ran out 20 minutes before the meeting even started. Brennan Voss sat stiffly near the back in a fresh suit, unaware of what was coming, checking his phone every few minutes like the meeting might end early. Colette kept her opening remarks short and steady, standing at a podium borrowed from the elementary school gymnasium. She explained that Meridian's 9-branch expansion, including the long-promised Ashcombe Falls renovation and its 12 new jobs, had been paused this week over a licensing issue tied to the bank's own core technology. "That technology exists because of a private company called Ledgerline," Colette said, her voice carrying to the back of the packed room. "Grady, would you come up here, please?" A ripple went through the crowd as Grady walked to the front in the same work jacket he'd worn all week, nor a small hand in his, her spelling test folder tucked under her other arm because they'd come straight from the school where she'd just gotten a perfect score. Brennan sat forward so fast his chair scraped hard against the floor, loud enough that half the room turned to look at him instead of the podium. "6 years ago, I helped build the underwriting software that now runs inside Meridian's mobile app and inside 8 other branches across 3 counties," Grady said, his voice steady and unhurried, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to hold a room. "2 years ago, I sold that company on one condition, that for 2 years, any bank expanding on top of my work had to answer to me first if they ever used it to shut people out instead of letting them in." He paused there, letting the room sit with that for a moment. The only sound the creak of folding chairs as people shifted to see him better. "On Tuesday, I walked into this branch wearing exactly what I'm wearing right now and asked for a $15,000 loan to keep my father's shop open for another generation," Grady continued. "I was told, in front of a full lobby and my own daughter, that people like me don't invest, we beg, and that begging isn't collateral." A murmur ran through the crowd, several heads turning slowly toward the back row where Brennan sat frozen, his face draining of color under the community hall's harsh fluorescent lights, his wife 2 rows over pressing her hand to her mouth. "Not every man in coveralls is asking you for a favor," Grady said, his eyes finding Brennan's for the first time since the moment Brennan had slid that folder back across the counter. "Some of us already own the room we're standing in." The room went completely silent for a long beat, then broke into scattered, stunned applause that grew steadier and louder as it spread from row to row. Mrs. Alvarez stood up from her folding chair near the front and simply looked at Brennan for a long moment, saying nothing, letting her silence do what words might have softened. Colette stepped back to the podium, visibly rattled but composed, waiting for the room to quiet before she went on. "Effective this morning, Meridian is releasing full ownership of the 12-job renovation to a community advisory board, chaired by Mr. Holt, with funding fully restored. And Mr. Voss's role at this branch is being reviewed, effective immediately, pending a full accounting of how customers have been treated at this counter." Brennan didn't say a word in his own defense, though several people near him seemed to expect he might.
He stood slowly, buttoned his jacket with hands that weren't quite steady, and walked out through the side door alone, past neighbors who wouldn't meet his eyes, past a wife who followed a few steps behind him with her arms crossed tight against her chest. Nobody called after him. Nobody needed to, because the whole room had already said everything that needed saying without a single word aimed in his direction. By the following spring, Holt & Son Hardware and Repair had a new sign, a fully restocked inventory, and 2 new employees, both laid-off veterans from the old mill, hired the week the community fund cleared and the paperwork finally caught up to the promises made in that crowded hall. Grady still wore coveralls every day, because that had never been a costume for a meeting. It was simply who he was, on ordinary Tuesdays and extraordinary ones alike. He never touched the $50 million sitting in high-water holdings for himself, not for a bigger house, not for a newer truck, not for anything Marisol would have raised an eyebrow at from wherever she was watching. He redirected a portion of it into a standing small business fund for Ashcombe Falls, administered not by Meridian, but by an independent community board with strict, published lending standards nobody could quietly ignore or overlook again. Colette Ferris kept her position at the branch, retrained her entire lending staff personally over 3 weekends, and made a standing rule that no loan officer under her could deny an application without a documented second review from someone outside their own chain of approval. People around town started calling it the Holt Rule within a month, whether Grady liked having his name attached to it or not. "You could have let them name a whole building after you," Priya told him over the phone one evening, half joking. "Instead, you let them name a paperwork policy." "Paperwork policies actually help people," Grady said, watching Nora do cartwheels in the backyard through the kitchen window. "Buildings just sit there." One of the 2 veterans he'd hired, a soft-spoken former mechanic named Dale Roos, turned out to have a gift for small engine diagnostics that put Grady's own younger skills to shame. Dale had spent 8 months after the mill closed sending out applications that never got a call back, and he told Grady once, quietly, that the interview at Holt & Son had been the first time in a year someone had looked him in the eye while he talked about work. "You didn't even ask about the gap on my resume," Dale said one afternoon, elbow deep in a lawnmower engine. "Most places wouldn't get past that first page." "Didn't need to. I know what an empty year looks like from the inside. Wasn't about to hold it against a man who showed up ready to work." Brennan Voss was quietly let go within a month of the meeting, and word around Ashcombe Falls was that no bank in 3 counties would touch his resume once Meridian's internal review notes started circulating through the local lending community. Nobody drove him out of town, and nobody needed to. He left on his own before the school year ended, his moving truck parked outside his old rental for exactly one gray Saturday morning. The last anyone in Ashcombe Falls saw of him, he was standing across the street during the shop's official ribbon cutting that following June, watching from a distance as the whole town packed the sidewalk to celebrate a mechanic he'd once told in front of a full lobby to try a payday lender down the highway. He didn't cross the street, he didn't say anything. He just watched for a few minutes, then got in his car and drove away before the ribbon was even cut.
Nora cut that ribbon herself, grinning wide under a hand-lettered banner that read Holt & Son, established 1962, still standing, her mother's old sunglasses pushed up into her hair the way she'd started wearing them that spring. Grady stood behind her, coveralls clean for once, hands folded, saying nothing while the crowd cheered, because he'd learned a long time ago that the quietest people in a room are sometimes the ones who were never asking for permission at all. He caught Colette's eye across the crowd and gave her a small nod, the kind 2 people share when they've both come out the other side of something honest. She nodded back, then turned to help hand out the sheet cake someone from the diner had brought over for the occasion. Later that evening, after the crowd had thinned and the banner had come down, Grady found Nora sitting on the shop's back step, exactly where she'd eaten ice cream the week everything changed, tracing the shop's new sign with one finger, like she was memorizing it. "Dad," she said, not looking up, "are we rich now? Everybody kept saying that word today." Grady sat down beside her, the evening air cool against the back of his neck, the town quieter now than it had been in years despite everything that had happened. "We were always rich, Nora Bird. Today just made sure people around here get treated a little more fairly because of it. That's worth more than any number in an account." Nora thought about that for a while, swinging her legs off the edge of the step.
"Walt says you should charge people double for putting up with them," she said. "Are you going to charge the bank double now?" Grady laughed, the first real laugh he'd let himself have in days, and pulled her into his side. "No, Nora Bird, I think making them do right by this whole town is payment enough." Down the street, the lights in Meridian's newly finished lobby stayed on late that night, Colette walking the floor alone with a legal pad, sketching out the new review policy she'd promised the town in that packed hall. Somewhere 3 counties over, Van Trust's board quietly noted the entire episode as a lesson in reading the fine print of their own contracts. And on 3rd Street, the sign above Holt & Son Hardware and Repair caught the last of the evening light, its new letters bright and unbroken, standing exactly where Grady's father had first hung it more than 60 years before. If this story hit you right, hit like, share it with someone who's ever been judged by their work boots instead of their worth, and subscribe for the next one, because karma always clocks in for its shift.